My name's Laura. I am a member of Delco MPAC. We are volunteers in the community in a grassroots effort to talk about this police accountability. I'm going to just read parts of our mission real quick, just to make sure I get it all in here. So, so you're aware, and so many of you are part of MPAC as well. So the Delco Municipal Police Accountability Coalition is an umbrella group dedicated to empowering people at the most local level to reimagine what policing in their community should be like. We do this by bringing together neighbors working at the grassroots level across Delaware County who want to ensure that their police departments are best serving the needs of their communities. Some of the things that we do, our members work to provide information about policing best practices, current news, and comparative data to our municipal working group so that they can engage in with local decision makers to ensure that their police serve all community members, including those in marginalized groups, in a manner that is safe, transparent, unbiased, ethical, and fiscally sound. So just a little bit about MPAC. I'm also going to put in the chat the link if anybody wants more information about what we do. And on that, we are recording today. So just so everyone knows that there is a recording. I'm actually then going to turn it over to Rosalind, who is going to introduce our wonderful speakers today.
Thank you so much. And if you're just joining us, please feel free to put your name, where you're from, your organization, any other details you'd like to share in the chat. It is my very great pleasure to introduce our speakers. I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will be speaking. And if you have any questions, please feel free. Some folks did send questions in beforehand. The speakers have seen those questions. If you have any questions throughout the program, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can when our speakers have made their presentations. So I'm going to start with Senator Tim Kearney, who began his career as an architect, which brought him to the Planning Commission, which then led him to run for borough president, which he won, and then now and currently as state senator from the 26th district. Tim has fought for workers and families before and during the pandemic, including workplace safety, economic relief, housing assistance, and the $15 minimum wage. He's introduced legislation to improve public safety, including resources to first responders, secured funding for Delaware County's first health department, and brought state and county stakeholders together to get public health infrastructure up and running in the midst of the pandemic. Senator, you may get a question about supporting the county's plans for mobile crisis teams. So just in case that comes up. Of course, we've asked the senator here to talk about Brianna's Law. He was a sponsor of that bill and introduced it in August of 2020 and again in March of 2021. This bill, Senate Bill 296, would ban no-knock warrants like the one that led to Breonna Taylor's death. And it would require law enforcement officers to knock and announce themselves when serving a warrant, wait at least 15 seconds for a response, and for officers to wear body cameras immediately prior, during, and just after a search, also to wear clothing that identifies them as law enforcement. Senator Kearney will also share his thoughts on police accountability and criminal justice at the state level, the prospects for Breonna's Law and other state legislation we should be aware of, and ideas on how we can advocate for training resources in our county. So we may also touch on de-escalation and implicit bias. And I'm going to now turn to our next speaker, Professor David Harris. Welcome. Professor David Harris, I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, is the Sally Ann Semenko Chair and Professor of Law at the University of Pittsburgh's Law School, where he teaches criminal law and procedure and evidence. He devotes his research to the study of police conduct, search and seizure law, and the intersection of race and criminal justice. He's the leading national authority on racial profiling. His 2002 book, Profiles in Injustice, and his many scholarly articles on the topic resulted in new laws and regulations in hundreds of American police departments. And we're going to put the chat to some of what Professor Harris has written in the chat. He also wrote the first law journal examination of body-worn cameras in 2010. His most recent book, A City Divided: Race, Fear, and the Law in Police Confrontations, tells the story of Jordan Miles, a case that took place in Pittsburgh, and how it explains police civilian violence, particularly with African-American men. He's also the creator and host of the Criminal Injustice podcast, which, although is now on hiatus, can still be accessed through the website, which we will provide to you. In 2020, Professor Harris served as a member of the Mayor's Community Task Force on Police Reform in Pittsburgh, consulted in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing to recommend ways to change policing. We are pleased to welcome Professor David Harris, who will talk about the state of police accountability and criminal justice in Pennsylvania and at the national level. I know you did a podcast about Justice Comey Barrett and how you thought she might come down on some decisions now that she's been on the court. It might be interesting to hear your perspectives on that. Also, encouraging police departments to participate in de-escalation training, the impact of the SCOTUS decisions here in Pennsylvania, and creating no-knock practices, body cameras, especially here at the local level. So with that, let's turn it over to Senator Tim Kearney.
Oh, thank you, Rosalind. I'm really pleased to be here. I am Tim Kearney. I'm the senator from the 26th district, which is, as I think most people on this call know, is mostly in Delaware County, a little bit of Chester County. But with redistricting, I'll be all in Delco after, or the 26th district will be all in Delco at the new year. The topic we're talking about is huge and has so many different facets to it that it's sort of difficult to sort of try to cover it all, which we obviously can't. I think one of the things I discovered after I became the senator was that everything on the state level is interrelated, and everything interweaves with things in ways you don't necessarily understand or even consider at the basic level. So in terms of police accountability, I think that the place to sort of start is the things that we ask our police departments to do on a daily basis. They become we ask them to basically solve all our problems. A call to 911 is we look at that as to basically come and fix what's wrong or come and fix what the problem is. And that's sort of unfortunate because, police don't tend to be trained in what a lot of the issues that we see. We're working very hard in Delaware County, and I'm really pleased to see Dr. Monica Taylor's on the call. The work that she's been doing at the county is nothing short of amazing. But we've been having discussions and sort of looking at programs that are in place in Montgomery County, for example, about who actually answers a 911 call, who actually who can decide whether or not the police respond to it, or the police and a social worker, or a social worker, or medical personnel is an interesting discussion that we should be having, because so often we expect police officers to walk into situations that they can't control and they don't really understand, and we ask them to sort of to solve it immediately, and that's a problem. When I was the mayor in Swarthmore, one of the things a borough mayor does is he's the chief public safety officer. So you interact with the police on a daily basis and see the issues. And the other aspect that I'm cognizant of, and I think we shouldn't forget, is that most police officers are trained to think of things in the worst case scenarios. I remember the first time I was in one of the police cars in Swarthmore. I said, "Well, why do you have a shotgun? Why does the police department need a shotgun in the quiet little borough of Swarthmore?" And it was kind of like, well, if something happened where we needed it and we didn't have it, then it would be that could be a problem. But we the reason I'm talking about this and putting it in this context is that we need to convince the police that what we're trying to do is the right things. It works for them as well as working for all of us. So what we're asking is really a fundamental shift in priorities. I mean, the Breonna's law is a great example of that. Breonna law is obviously based on Breonna Taylor. We were, at the time we introduced it, they were being introduced in a lot of states around and we got to have some interesting conversations with senators and representatives from, including Kentucky, where they actually did manage to pass one. But it's the context becomes really the problem. It's, you know, the no-knock warrants are used in situations where the police are trying to surprise the people that they're trying to get to, and the reason I keep hearing is that they want to preserve evidence. So if they knock on a door and announce themselves, they're afraid that someone's going to, you know, flush all the drugs down the toilet, kind of thing. And I think that begs the question: well, what's the real priority here? Is getting the evidence more important than your safety and more important than the safety of the people who are actually in the apartment? So that's the case we try to make when we talk to officers about you know, why we think it's a good idea, and we do get, you know, support from people. When we introduced it, most of the people I talked to in Delaware County said, "Oh, we never do no-knock warrants," or "That's just something we don't do." And that brings up another aspect about policing in the Commonwealth, is that it's all individual fiefdoms. They all follow kind of like their own rules at this point. We've had legislation that's still pending, trying to create databases where police departments actually would report, you know, report arrests or report traffic stops or report all sorts of things. Right now, they don't report it to any particular, there's no central database across the Commonwealth for that. They keep the records, and they keep the records in different ways and different information that they keep. But the only reason they keep it is because they might get audited by the Attorney General or the FBI. And it's, you know, I think that kind of information, traffic stops in particular, would be a wonderful thing for us to be able to track and keep, you know, data is king in a lot of these situations. So that's something that we're very interested in, the whole idea of like keeping the records and making them, you know, making them consistent and the data reporting consistent. Another aspect that we're talking with a lot of our police chiefs about is whether or not the departments can be, what's the word I want now? Just to do blank on it. It's like not a registry, but it's a certification that they pass. It's usually done by the
accreditation.
Say it again.
Accreditation,
right? But through usually it's through the Police Chiefs Association. There's actually two different ones that do the accreditation. Normally, it's most officers or most police departments say they don't do it because it costs money. So we're looking into ways to try to figure out how that can actually work. We work a lot with Chief Splain over in Nether Providence, who's a great supporter of that. And again, that's a step from our point of view in Harrisburg. Here, we're trying to establish metrics that can actually be, you know, consistent and apply in ways that we can't always hear or know. So the great frustration, of course, is that anytime you introduce something like Breonna's law, people see it as anti-police. You know, one of the worst things we ever did as Democrats was kind of the whole defund the police piece turned into a trope that we lost control of very quickly. And it's we don't really want to defund the police. We want them to concentrate on different things. We want them to think about the way that they actually, you know, we want to kind of get away from the warrior culture with the police department and talk about peace officers. I think that's what most of us are really interested in. But you know, words are they're important, right? And they take on meaning sometimes that we don't necessarily intend. The last aspect before we turn it over to the professor, I think, is, you know, what you can do as concerned citizens, you can do as your organization, is basically keep the pressure on. I mean, you need to keep the pressure on us, on people in Harrisburg. And even if you think that, you know, I agree with you on things, it's still worth it to make sure you send me an email or you call the office or whatever to let people know who, you know, what you think, because we keep track of everything. We keep track of all the calls, we keep track of all the emails, we keep track of letters, we keep track of all the information that comes in, and we create, you know, a database based on that where we can say, well, I've heard from, you know, X number of constituents about this issue. And this is, you know, so often we think that if you're pretty confident that I agree with you, you don't bother to send me a note or you don't bother to talk about it. And that's something that's important. I mean, and that also leads to one other thing, in that in Delaware County right now, we have a wonderful sort of almost like government ladder where we talk all the time with, I talk with my, you know, my House compatriots. I talk with Mary Gay Scanlon. I talk with, you know, with county council and with people in the local government as well. So we actually have these conversations now ongoing up and down the sort of ladder of government. And that's something I think that's going to be important, something that really came in handy or worked really well with establishing the health department in Delaware County, was that, you know, ability to have those conversations up and down the ladder and secure support and keep things moving apart. So that was kind of a lot in a relatively short amount of time, but I think it's appropriate to move on, and we'll answer questions in a bit.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that so much. Then let's turn the mic over to Professor David Harris.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you. Thanks to the organizations. Thanks especially to Brian, who was the one who invited me. I really take a lot from Senator Kearney's remarks, because he's a person who understands the process. You can just tell he wants you to write to him and give him ideas and poke him a little. And of course, not just him, but his colleagues and other people that are in your government. And that's really, bottom line, what addressing these problems is going to take. I think I'm right about this, that this is not the first time that Senator Kearney has introduced Breonna's Law. I think it was introduced in the last session. Yes. And was not enacted. And it is the law in some other places. And that, I think, does give you a sense of how difficult a struggle this can be over a multitude of police-related issues. There is no easy way to get any of this done. And in a state like Pennsylvania, that is dominated in a supermajority sense in the legislature by one party, and in which, with which the law enforcement lobbies have strong power, it's very difficult. And I've seen it up close myself, having testified at some state hearings and so forth. And you can just tell, I mean, you really can, whose voices seem to count to more legislators. So it takes more work if you want change and you want reform, but the prize is worth it. When we talk about Breonna's Law, I am so appreciative of Senator Kearney for introducing that, because no-knock warrants are something that could easily go away entirely without not any loss of evidence in any real sense, but with much greater safety and security for people in homes or locations that get raided, and for police themselves. These are dangerous, dangerous things when they are speeded up. Anytime you have armed people going into a dwelling or a business or something like that, screaming, we got a warrant, we're coming in, police, something like that, it's obvious that there's danger there. There could be firearms inside, there could be evidence inside. Usually these situations resolve with the arrests or with the searches, whichever is called for by the warrant, but no knocks are simply not necessary. However, in the vast majority of cases, however, our policing has become so militarized and so clustered around the ideas of especially drug raids having to have no-knock warrants, and the SWAT teams that are now everywhere, including some of the smallest jurisdictions. You can't believe that they could have a SWAT team. The SWAT team is as big as the whole department. That this has just become sort of routine in even garden variety service of warrants. And it's very, very dangerous. So this is not something I think that this is a good argument to have. This is a good fight to have, because we have seen not only example cases such as Breonna Taylor's and others in which things go terribly wrong, but it just isn't necessary in the vast majority of cases for law enforcement purposes. In garden variety warrant cases, not no-knocks, but regular warrants, the police have to announce themselves, but as soon as they were to detect any evidence that something was going on inside, like the drugs being flushed down the toilet, they can go right in. They don't have to wait any longer for the door to be opened. If there's any evidence that they're in danger of any kind, they can go straight in. So you don't actually need these in the vast majority of cases. Now, let's assume that here we are, we're in Pennsylvania. It's difficult to get a law like this passed. Does it mean that we stop with Senator Kearney's proposal? We're glad to have it, but should the effort stop there? Absolutely not. In Pittsburgh here, we have a Breonna's Law of a sort of our own. This was done through local organizing by grassroots groups. They put a form of Breonna's Law on the ballot here in Pittsburgh, and it passed overwhelmingly. Now, the Pittsburgh police said the same thing that I heard Senator Kearney or others say earlier. We don't do that anyway, so it's not going to matter to us. Well, now it's the law, right? And so this is a good example of how we have to think these days. Let me tell you what I'm thinking here. When I hear people trying to discuss criminal justice reform, the first thing I hear, oh, Biden, he promised a lot and he hasn't done a lot. He hasn't done anything on this. Or that Congress, they'll never do anything. That was all, a bunch of ploys and discussion and nothing happened. Well, you know what? The fact of the matter is that law enforcement in the United States is not primarily federal. It is not even close to primarily federal. The US Constitution governs all law enforcement activity, but only in the broadest strokes, things like Fourth Amendment law, Fifth Amendment law, Sixth Amendment law. Now that's important. I teach it. I live by that stuff. Don't get me wrong. But when it comes to running police departments, that is state law and local law regulation and practice. And we are hyper localized with policing in this country. We are hyper localized with police departments in this country. Every once in a while, I'm in the UK, or I have fellow academics come over from the UK, and we're talking about policing and the issues that we have, and there are parallel issues. And some at some point in the conversation, the folks from the UK will mention that they have 46 police departments in the UK. Can you believe it? Getting your arms around all that? And I say, let me just, 18,000 is our number, 18,000 police departments. And the US Department of Justice, which you'd think would have a lot to say about these things, runs the FBI, the DEA, the Secret Services in the Treasury Department. There's the US Parks Police, things like that. All the rest of it is state and local, all right? So you really have to think in terms of action at the state and local level. I think everybody can understand what we mean when we talk about the state level. It's what Senator Kearney is doing. It's supporting actions like let's have Breonna's Law. It's about supporting proposals from my rep Summer Lee in the House of Representatives, who proposed a good reformulation of use of force law for Pennsylvania. It would be about attacking something like Act 111, which I don't know if you're aware of this, but it makes arbitration of police misconduct and discipline cases binding and required in Pennsylvania. And it's the reason why, police chiefs all over the state, and this is a national problem, not a state problem, but they basically, the whole job with misconduct is, they find the worst officers acting up, they fire them, and then they get them back. Right? They impose discipline and it's overruled by the arbitrator. This is Act 111. Now, Act 111 has some good purposes. We'd have to have a whole other session to get to what they are, but that needs to be changed, right? And that's state law, and that's a heavy lift. But I would urge everybody here not to neglect to think locally. All right. Does it affect the whole country as if the Congress was doing something? No. But guess what? Congress isn't doing anything. And even when they do, they don't have the national reach that everybody seems to think. Congress and the president can pour money into local law enforcement and say, hey, build more jails, as they did during the Clinton administration. There's an idea. Or they can encourage community policing, as they did during Obama's time with money, or they can buy body cameras, as they did during Obama's time with federal money, but they don't rule local policing, right? And so if you want to have an effect on local policing in your county, in your town, in your township, you have to think locally and act locally. Statewide, if he can do it, push, push, push. I admire Senator Kearney and what he and his colleagues are trying to do, but think locally too. I mean, I'll give you two examples of some things that have happened locally that represent, to me, real progress. You can see a lot of different things if you look at what various cities did in the aftermath of George Floyd. I think it was mentioned in my introduction that here in Pittsburgh, I served on the then current mayor's task force on police reform, and we ended up making over 100 recommendations, and the vast majority of them were adopted, including things into police and city policy, like you must have de-escalation training and policy. You will have an intervention rule. In other words, if one officer sees another using excessive force, they will intervene. They have a duty to intervene. There are a whole host of things that you can get done locally that way. But you can even go into some real important specifics. And let me give you a couple of examples. I already mentioned how Pittsburgh voters, after local political organizing and action, put in place a Breonna's Law. No more no-knock warrants here in Pittsburgh. We also have had, like Philadelphia, a change in how we're doing traffic enforcement. Now, this isn't just, did you get a ticket for going 35 and a 25? This is the practice of using traffic enforcement as a pretext to investigate crimes for which police have no evidence. This has been at the heart of a lot of my work and research for basically my whole career, racial profiling in traffic enforcement. And it is through efforts in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia that those two police departments no longer have the power to stop drivers for the 8 or 10 most common offenses that are used as pretexts for stops. And of course, they're used overwhelmingly and disproportionately against the African-American population. They result in bogus searches. They result in higher levels of arrest. All of these things are pernicious. They happen everywhere, but in these two cities, because of local efforts, here it was a city ordinance here in Pittsburgh, police can no longer make stops for things like expired inspection tags and things hanging off the rear view mirror and things like that. These are not high safety priorities, as you can imagine. They are instead just excuses to use the law to investigate people for things where the police just look at somebody and say, that guy looks wrong, or he's in the wrong neighborhood, or what is that white guy and black guy doing in the same car? And they get stopped. right? This is an example of something that I think can be helpful. It's real action that we can get our local people to take on the state or county level. So those are, I want to really leave you feeling like there are things you can do. There are things you can work for and make happen on your home ground. Now, this stuff isn't going to be easy. You're going to get pushback. You're going to get people saying, well, you're going to limit traffic stops. What about Tim McVeigh? He was caught, the Oklahoma City bomber was caught when he was driving without a license plate. You're going to let a guy like that go? What if people have guns in those cars? Well, they might find evidence using a pretext traffic stop. I can't deny that. Police sometimes do. But we actually have data on this, and it's very, very few cases that ever result in the recovery of a gun. It is far less than 1% in the vast majority of jurisdictions that have ever measured this. And in the bargain, you get lots of people stopped for what they can see is transparently no good reason, often with a racial inflection, and it breaks down trust in law enforcement. So as we talk about how to make the argument to law enforcement, we have to say to them, look, you need the community behind you. If you don't get these practices under control, you're going to lose the trust of the people you serve and the people you need to back you up, the people you want to talk to you when something bad happens. So there's a lot more we can talk about, a lot more we can say. I really do agree with Senator Kearney that for too long we have asked police to do too much, address too many problems. But even in the core of their work, in the core of their conduct, there are things that can be improved and changed, and that will depend upon all of us insisting on getting the policing that we want in our communities, because we don't want the police to go away. I mean, I don't personally. There may be a lot of people who do on this call. I don't know. I guess not. The people in my communities generally don't want police to go away. They want policing done differently to actually serve people and protect them. I think I'll stop there, and I'll look forward to your questions. I thank you again for the opportunity.
Really great information. Thank you so much, Representative Kearney and Dr. Harris. I'll try to go through the questions. We did receive a number ahead of time, so we tried to group them. So folks on the phone, if you don't hear your exact one, we are trying to cover all the categories of questions that we got. On the topic of strategies for change, in a Republican-controlled legislature, what are realistic strategies for getting anything meaningful accomplished in Harrisburg? For example, executive action or federal funding with mandates.
It's very difficult. Even just, kind of going back to what David was saying earlier, the things like just keeping track of the data in terms of traffic stops. I mean, we actually, the state police used to keep records for a while, and then they didn't like the results they were seeing with the data collection. So they stopped the data collection. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to get, to force to happen again, because very often the best thing you can do is hold up the reality to people as opposed to what their perceptions are. I think, sure, there's some bad cops around, but I think most cops are trying to, keep people safe, and they think that what they're doing is somehow justified. But I think as the professor was saying, if we had the data, if we literally could show them the fact that, less than 1% of a traffic stop turns up with a gun or something. I had one police chief tell me, "Oh, seeds are our best friend. Because if I spot, marijuana seeds on the seat or whatever, I can search the whole car. I have justification for anything." And that's, we could spend hours talking about, just the fact that marijuana is called marijuana because it was, instead of cannabis, because it was meant to be derogatory towards Latinos, towards Mexicans. It's an interesting. These onions they're really big, and there's a lot of things to peel back in terms of how it works. But so I that's my way of saying I think the best way to do anything on the state level is with the data, with the being able to actually see what's actually in reality happening versus what the perception of most people have, and most of the people who beat their chest the most, and you know, we've all seen the Blue Lives Matter stuff, and it really kind of drives us crazy.
Thank you. David, did you want to add anything to that, or do you want me to move on to the next one?
Go ahead, move on.
Okay. All right. How can we encourage police departments to participate in de-escalating and implicit bias training?
I think that's a very good question. And it really is broader than that. It's how you can get them to participate in any kind of training that is not just the standard. There are economic issues that have to be considered. If you have a small-ish police department, and by the way, most police departments in the United States are small-ish, and we're talking about less than 50, right? And lots are less than, or 10 or less. If you're going to train Joe and Jane, you got to have people to cover their shifts. And that's not always easy. So I don't want to undersell or fail to recognize that. But I think, when you start to talk to police, they actually like the idea of being trained. They like better training. And the way to encourage this sort of thing is to appeal to their desire to be trained in the latest, in something that they think matters. And so you have to look, the police and police agencies are the same as any other people or their agencies. You got to show them what's in it for them. I mean, that's really the bottom line. It would be nice if we could say to whether we're talking about police or firemen or public schools or anything else, do this because it is good for you or society. You got to show them what is good for, what will make their job go better, what will make them better officers, what can make them safer. It's not that they're unconcerned with the public. They certainly are. But you got to show them why it is a good thing for them, why it will make them better. Implicit bias training, in my experience, is a hard sell that way. And I say that as somebody who does implicit bias training for police departments. But other things can be encouraged to participate in if they have the right leadership that buys into the concept, and they can see why it makes them better, why it makes the agency better, why it will get them more public support. I'll give you one example. There's some new training, some new concepts about, that swirl around this idea that I referred to earlier, the duty to intervene, right? The duty to intervene. When you see other officers committing misconduct, you must step in. Now, this is not an original idea with policing. If you think about it, this is the same idea that we try to impose, get going with new college freshmen. We tell them about sexual assault or alcohol abuse. We try to tell them they have to have the courage to intervene. And there are a whole host of situations where this sort of thinking has taken root. It's new in law enforcement. Now, the first effort to do this with law enforcement was in New Orleans during their, not first, but second Department of Justice consent decree. That was a very troubled department. And they created something there called EPIC. Ethical policing is courageous. Bottom line, this was a duty to intervene program, and it transformed that department into a department you could be proud to be a member of, from one that was really awful. And it is now, this same training was brought then by the Justice Department lawyer in charge of it, became a faculty member at Georgetown Law. She has created a whole center around this idea where they bring in police departments and police trainers from around the country to participate in what they call, their program is called ABLE. It stands, basic law enforcement, assisted bystander, something or other, right? And our police department at the University of Pittsburgh, and we have a full dress police department, as many universities do, has taken that training and they love it. And because of that, they've become sort of leaders in the county right? So that the reason I bring it up is because not only is it a good idea, something you want your law enforcement agency to be doing, but it can actually make them stand out. If you can show them things like that, they will, in many cases, not all, buy into it.
Let me just jump in real quick to follow up on some of David's points. I think one of the reasons we're really interested in accreditations for police departments is just that, is the sort of like it's a continuity across departments, which doesn't exist right now. We had that tragic shooting over in Sharon Hill where where a little girl died, and it seems, well, it seems obvious that the bullet came from the police, and it was at least all sorts of questions about the training and the level of training that works. All departments have to do the MPAC training, which is, I remember when I was the mayor, we used to get the report as to who had done which training. This stuff still had to do, and it was fairly varied. But the accreditation thing would really force them to up their games in terms of the types of training and how it works. And there are, segments that do the kind of training that David was talking about, the implicit bias stuff, which is always a hard sell to anybody just because of the nature of the training itself. So there's a lot to unravel here. I see someone said that the police want that case dropped. Of course they do. They always want the cases dropped. And so many of these things actually do go back to Act 111, which David was referring to earlier. That's sort of like the roadmap of the relationship between the police and the municipalities, of the police and the state. And it's, particularly the FOPs all feel like they worked really hard to get that Act 111 where it really works for them. The question is, does it really work for all of us? And it's an interesting thing. It's always been sort of the third rail of politics, because it's so directly tied to the police. But there are people on the Republican side who there are aspects of Act 111 that they don't like. A lot of it tends to, very often they could almost bankrupt municipalities in terms of, because when something does go to arbitration, which the police tend to get to pick the arbitrators, and they almost always win, and the municipalities on the hook for all the legal fees, the court costs, et cetera, which is why people think twice about really pushing stuff or whatever. But that's something it's a huge thing, but it gets to that sort of foundation of kind of what we expect the police to do and what we allow them to, what we sort of give up for that sort of protection. So.
Can I just look, Laura, real quick? I saw that there was a comment or a question saying, would improving the criteria and screening used to recruit police officers reduce violence and racism in policing? I didn't want to miss that because I thought that was a good question.
It is a good one. I'd love to hear what David has to say about it, but I'm going to jump in real quick and go back to Act 111 again. So when you're hiring a police officer, different municipalities can have different criteria. For example, I remember in the borough of Swarthmore, where I'm from, we had a requirement that officers had a college degree, which is not always the case for police officers. And I think the thought was Swarthmore's a college town. It has a lot of, and people could relate better. The chief, who I, very much like and admire, wanted us to get rid of it just because he thought it was, cutting down his officer pool that he could kind of choose from. But, part of that too, besides that kind of specific regulation, is the state dictates that you have to give preference to veterans. In other words, they get extra points. And so if you have two equal candidates and one's a veteran and one's not, it always goes to the veteran. That's, and this is not anything against veterans. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It's just, it's a thing where, veterans are part of that, for the most part of that warrior culture, part of the way that they think about things. So I'm not sure I'm not implying that that those people are racist or that they're, but it's just a different mentality that we often see. So
Yeah, I'll throw in on this very quickly too. The recruiting and training, I think, was the question. Can that make a difference? And the answer is emphatically yes, but it really does have to be rethought in a very basic way. I'll give you a couple of things that have to be done differently. Number one is there has to be extremely thorough screening of incoming officer candidates in at least these two respects. Number one, their social media presence has to be scoured up and down and sideways and inside out, because you want to detect anybody who's been hanging around with paramilitary groups, white supremacist groups, white nationalist groups, anybody who's been, because people put that stuff out there, and they use symbols and they use little yuck ways of suggesting things that you would not find acceptable in a police officer. And that has to actually be kept up and done with the people who are on the force now. Number two, you want to recruit better officers. You got to go to the community and say, what do you want in a police officer? Yes, we have to give veterans preference because that's state law, but tell us what you want. Now, where this has been done in some places, and I wrote about this in one of my books, the community doesn't say, the ability to use a battering ram in a no-knock raid. It doesn't say the ability to rappel down from a helicopter and get into a building like you would see on recruitment ads. It says we want people who have good communication skills, who will talk to us, who are not afraid of the kids on the corner, who have basic integrity and who want to be involved in the community and not police it like an invading army. We want certain traits. It's not all about physical strength, things like that. That's what happens when you actually ask the community, what do you want, instead of assuming that that you got to have officers who can do 25 or 50 push-ups. Beyond this, you have to pay attention to culture. Even if you recruit well, if you don't address the existing culture in the police department you will just replicate that culture over and over with new officers, even if you get good ones, because they're going to try to fit in and they're going to want to get promoted and they're going to want to get good assignments. And they will be absorbed into the existing culture. So you have to address that. And that is no small thing. Believe me, I know I'm not saying something small here, but if you want to change your police department, if you think it needs to be different, it's a culture thing.
Thank you. Let's see if we can get through a few more questions. We've got several more. How can we modify the law so that body-worn cameras are readily available to public interests while respecting privacy and law enforcement concerns regarding case development? With limited or no access to public interest, these promises cannot be realized.
Oh boy, I could talk for a long time about this. As Rosalind said when she was introducing me, I wrote about this a long time ago before body cameras were on anybody's radar in this country. And I was very hopeful. I thought this could be good. This could be something that could assure accountability and so forth. They finally burst onto the scene all at once in the wake of the killing of Michael Brown in Missouri. Every mayor, every police chief, every police department wanted body cameras. And we really didn't have a lot of evidence about how this would work. We simply plunged into the experiment. But they were sold to us, and sold is a good word because it was a huge public investment, as this is going to hold police accountable. It'll do other things too. It's going to, address bogus charges against officers. It's going to serve as an evidence collection device, but it's going to hold police accountable when they do things that are wrong. And that has become, in my opinion, a broken promise, because Pennsylvania, like many states, has greatly limited access to videos. Now, this is not universal. Some states are very different, and some cities within some states have handled this very differently, have been much more transparent. But part of the deal in Pennsylvania to get body cameras moving, I don't know how long Senator Kearney has been in the legislature, but back in 2017, it was necessary for the legislature to step in and change the old wiretapping law, because the old wiretapping law said anybody who records somebody in their own house is committing a felony, right? So imagine police officers wearing a live body camera running into somebody's house to, perform a rescue or something, and the camera's on, and all of a sudden you're recording people in their own house. No police officer or agency wanted to take that chance, though it seemed very remote that they would be charged. So they went to the state legislature, they got the change made, but in the bargain, all the video was taken out of the state right to know law. And Pennsylvania is not alone in doing things like that. North Carolina's done it, some other states have done it. That has to change. If you make a huge public investment of that and then you block public access to it, people feel like, here we go again. We got sold a bill of goods. They lied to us. This was just for their own purposes. And here we are again. So that's something that really needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, I don't see it happening. In fact, the tendency is all towards more restriction in Pennsylvania and elsewhere.
It's before my time, David.
This one isn't really a question, it's more of a comment where a person said they're very interested in countywide and individual boroughs' approaches, efforts, and results overall to address the issue of police intimidation. My husband, who's now deceased, this person wrote, has experienced an unforgettable episode of police intimidation as I watched. We tried at the time to address it with the guidance of courthouse authorities, which ended up with further intimidation. And I wonder if this has something a little bit to do with the culture issues that you discussed earlier.
Yeah, without knowing what happened in the individual case, of course, we can't address it. But yes, it is a culture thing, and it is a culture thing that spreads beyond the police department in the wrong kinds of political environments. If the police are looked upon as untouchable, there will be no redress, and police can go ahead and hand out threats or do whatever they want. And that is, boy, you want to talk about the breakdown of citizen police trust. And that is really the way to make it happen, among many others. So I'm sorry to hear that story, but you simply have to have public officials who understand that a police department is an agency of government in a democracy, right? Yeah, they're the guys with the guns, mostly guys, not all. But they don't get to run things. And if you're in an environment where they do, and they can run roughshod over anybody, you are not living in a real democracy.
Yeah, I agree with David on this. It really is a culture thing. I think training comes into a lot of it because, I kind of touched on it briefly before, but I talked about the warrior culture, within police departments, where it's part of it. The I'm in charge, you need to do what I need to tell you to do, and the inability to listen, or really kind of, empathy is always a hard thing to sort of dictate or tell people, try to get through to people. But sometimes in that, especially in the adrenaline filled, world of these kinds of police stops, I often ask myself, well, who decides to become a police officer in this day and age? And I think a lot of the motivations are pure and good, and some of them not so. And it's we all have bullies, and in our we see them in every aspect of. I certainly see a lot of them here in government, and it's it is a difficult kind of cultural thing. And I read that comment, and it made me sad. And I was sorry to hear that, and sorry that you went through that.
A little bit related, are either of you aware of any resources in Pennsylvania for survivors of police misconduct or harassment? Just when there's a fear that for filing any kind of complaint, that it could be very dangerous.
I'm really not, David. I don't know whether you know of anything.
There's nothing formal that I'm aware of, but people who are subjected to police misconduct, this may seem kind of hollow, but go talk to a lawyer. If your rights have been violated, if you have been hurt or damaged, I can't guarantee that you have a case, I can't guarantee that even if you have a case, your rights were violated, a lawyer will take it. Because our lovely Supreme Court has, whatever you think of them lately, they have been making it impossible to difficult for years to bring those kinds of cases. But there are lawyers out there who do those things as a regular part of practice. And so I would say, see if you can get legal action. That might be the way to get somebody's attention and to get some kind of redress.
Thank you. There was another question in the chat about someone had asked the DA's office about which municipalities had participated in recent mental health trainings for first responders, and they were told they couldn't tell which municipalities attended. How do we know the scorecard is accurate? I think that's actually kind of a question for MPAC, because we've done this transparency scorecard where we try to describe across all of Delaware County what different departments are doing and what they're sharing information about it. Just to say that, yeah, the scorecard is only as accurate as people are being transparent, or departments are being transparent about what they're doing. So there very may well be things that we miss because they're not made public.
That is key.
Hope I caught most of the questions. I want to turn it back to my other colleagues to see if there were any that I missed or that they wanted to bring up at this time.
Well, Professor Harris, you did just mention the Supreme Court. So I'm wondering if you have any other comments about the Supreme Court and the impact of their decisions on Pennsylvania.
Wow, what a broad question. I love it. I love it. And incidentally, I want to apologize to everybody here tonight for appearing like some low rent Dracula or something on your screen. I just moved into this place. There are no working lamps or anything. So that's why I look like this. I'm actually quite energized and I'm awake, though I don't look like it. The Supreme Court and its effect on Pennsylvania is, it's deep and it's wide. If we just confine the question to issues that we're talking about now, anytime the Supreme Court makes a decision on Fourth, Fifth, or Sixth Amendment issues, they have an impact on policing in Pennsylvania. For instance, just last week, they made a decision that said, yes, the Miranda warnings and the Miranda rights still exist, but you can't sue the government for violating your rights. If the judge doesn't suppress the statement for a violation of Miranda, you don't get to go sue for damages because of it. And that will have an effect in Pennsylvania, as it will everywhere else. When they make a use of force ruling, and that is search and seizure law. Think of seizure, we think of that when we think of arrest. Use of force is kind of, all in service of an arrest. You kill somebody as a police officer is like the ultimate seizure. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. And so anytime there's a Fourth Amendment decision in use of force, that affects how police must act in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania has, over the years, just in my area of law, the stuff I teach, has had a number of different Pennsylvania cases before it where they have had a distinct impact. I will tell you about one that's actually reached back even to me several years back, maybe it's 10 years almost at this point. The Supreme Court ruled that the formula used in juvenile cases in which juveniles could be sentenced to life without parole on a mandatory basis, that was unconstitutional. And at the time, hey, everybody likes to be number one. Guess who was number one with juveniles under that sentence? You and me, right? Pennsylvania had the most people like that in their prisons. And the Supreme Court said, you can't make that mandatory. It's just not allowed. Didn't say you can't have juveniles under life without parole sentences, which in my mind personally is a travesty beyond all words, but you can't make it mandatory. And so there were hundreds of people in Pennsylvania prisons, some of them quite, aged at this point, who'd been incarcerated for decades and decades, and said, oh, maybe I get to be resentenced now. Then there was a question of whether it would be retroactive or just looking forward. Supreme Court finally said, no, retroactive, right? So all those cases in Pennsylvania had to be resentenced, and a number of people ended up released. I am part of what's called the Elsinore Benu Think Tank for Restorative Justice here in Pittsburgh. And this was founded by 7 or 8 men who were released after that set of Supreme Court decisions, after serving 25, 35, 45 years in prison and had come out. They've gone in as kids and were now out. And they have done some of the most remarkable restorative justice work in our community here, have done some wonderful things. And they are among the wisest and most interesting people I have ever run across. My podcast was mentioned a few minutes ago. I've had several on as guests. They are just incredible, incredible people. And so it can have a very personal effect as well as these widespread legal effects too.
Yeah, and that's really true. It's interesting. The parole board nominees are coming through the Senate now. And I had a great conversation with someone a woman who's getting reappointed on the parole board. And that was the only thing she really wanted to talk about was the juvenile lifers and the effect that it really had on her, talking to them and understanding the situations that they were coming from. She mentioned 5 or 6 of them that had, were involved. They never pulled the trigger. They never intimidated anybody. They drove a car, kind of thing. And they've been in prison for 30, 40 years, kind of like as David was talking. I've also spent a fair amount of time at CSI Chester, talking mostly with the lifers who are there and a lot of the geriatric lifers. So, these guys who are, they're 60, 70, 80 years old, still in prison with no hope. They petition all the time. And some of them, as David was saying, are amazing. The conversations we have and the insight that they have. And there's several of them that are running foundations in their old neighborhoods from the prison, and they're all based on trying to, keep kids from making the mistakes that they did and winding up where they were. I keep hoping that we're going to make some progress on that because it's a financial, problem with the Commonwealth as well. The amount of money, it rises exponentially as prisoners get older. What it costs to keep them incarcerated, and these are guys who have, if you're incarcerated as a young man and you get released after 50, the recidivism rate is like less than 1%. I mean, substantially less than 1%. And it's like, what's the point here? I remember asking the Secretary of Corrections, why do they call it corrections? It's, right? I mean, where's the correcting occurring? What are we kind of, but that, I think that's, I know we're digressing a bit here, and that's a topic for, I think another day and another, actually we might have to have a drink if we did that topic, but that's a way to make it work. So thanks, Laura. I didn't mean to drone on there.
Oh, it was a great conversation. Thank you both so much. I want to, again, turn it back to Roz. Do you want to tap us out?
Sure. I just wanted to, we do have another, few minutes. If there are other questions in the chat or if someone had put something in the chat that we might have missed, please feel free to take a moment to speak up. We have these two amazing gentlemen here. And if not, then
I had one question. It's sort of sparked by some of the stuff in the chat. It can be really hard to know what is real in terms of what's possible. The question about the information that was asked for about who was at a mental health training, being told that, oh no, you can't have that information. How can people learn what kind of information is something they can have or not? I mean, this was apparently the DA's office. So where does one go when one's looking for information like that? Is any possibility that you guys would have some ideas?
David might have more practical. I mean, we've been trying to, do this from the state level with the transparency. We can't get these laws to actually move in the legislature that would require again, it goes back to what information do you keep? What information do you report? What information do you, because you can, some departments only keep track of traffic stops when they issue a violation, they issue a ticket, which is, we don't, that doesn't help us in terms of what we're trying to get through. So it's like, it's weird in this job. I becoming obsessed with metrics to the point where it's difficult it makes my head hurt sometimes, but it's a hard thing, right? To sort of not only keep track of the information, but tell people what the information that they need to keep track of is it's part and parcel of the whole thing. So David, you want to bail me out here?
Yeah, I don't have anything specific. I mean, we do have a right to know law here in Pennsylvania. It's not real robust, in my opinion. It could be a lot better, but that would take people to cooperate with folks like Tim Kearney. Pennsylvania has a very deep culture of why do you want to know, or who are you? And I've seen that at the state and the local level. I've lived in some other places too, but this is pretty near the top. So I think you just have to insist on it. And a good place to look for lessons about that, in my experience, is from journalists. They are really good at ferreting out stuff like this, at not taking no for an answer, even if it takes going to court. The ones who are really good at things like that, they know how to do it. I mean, we have a sort of analog of ProPublica here in Pittsburgh called Public Source, and they're local. They're funded, out of people's pockets and foundations and stuff, but they have some people there who really know how to make that happen. So I would tell you to turn to them if you can't get satisfaction. Get them interested in doing the story. That may loosen things up. Spotlight PA, I see is there's a link to one of their stories. Spotlight PA is also a good journalistic organization that people can turn to. I've worked some with them on a couple of their stories, and they seem to understand how to make that happen. I guess as we get near the end here, I would just like to say that I'm very appreciative of this group being together and looking for ways to improve things. Very appreciative of people like Senator Tim Kearney, who was there doing the job and trying to make good things happen. And is looking out for everybody, and extremely appreciative of all of you who are sharing your comments to us tonight. And I would just say, this can seem like a never-ending fight and kind of hopeless across all these issues. It is never-ending. That much is true. You have to keep fighting it even after you think you've won. But it is not hopeless. It is not easy for me to say, you might say, because here I am. I'm a white man. I'm a little older. Police have, basically no interest in me. I'm not going to attract that kind of attention or aggression. True enough, I give you that. But there are things that can be done, even if they're incremental. Don't give up. Demand the service and the policing that your community deserves. I saw a comment just a little while ago in the chat about how judges in the power structure punish Black people. What I tell people when I train implicit bias is, you want interventions, and I suggest certain things that can help. If you are an agency, if you are running an agency, whether it's a police department, a court system, you must count, right? And this goes directly to Tim's many points about data. You have to keep data about discretionary decisions and make it public. I love Tim's story, which is absolutely true about the state police. Yeah, they're collecting data about their traffic stops, and then they stop because they didn't like what they saw, right? That is absolutely the wrong way to go from the public's point of view. And so if you're running a public agency, if you want your public agencies to behave differently, you have to insist that they keep data on their crucial decisions. Anything where there is discretion with the authority of the state.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I was tasked to close us out tonight. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and signing up for this, and Senator Carney and Dr. Harris for, sharing a lot of wisdom and things that we can do. So we have a lot to think about. And, I think the message is not to give up, to keep, doing what we're doing. And we just appreciate you all being here with us to share in the conversation. So thank you so much for spending your Monday with us. And I will make sure that the recording and all of the links that were shared in the chat are going to go out to everyone who signed up.
Well, thank you, Laura. It really, keep shining the light. That's really the work that you guys can do. Shine a light on all these situations and hold us accountable, please.
Well said. Senator Kearney, I'd love to connect some other time. Thank
Absolutely.
you all. I really appreciate the group.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.